Hello there and welcome. In this episode we continue working on our survival series. Now that we are done with the enemy, we want to deal with our player, because at this point the player can receive damage, but if the damage goes under 0, nothing happens. So we want to implement some death logic and some respawn logic for the player. In the next episode we also want to add a respawn logic for the enemies, because at this point we need to manually place our enemies all over the scene and they will appear at the beginning of the game. But if we kill an enemy, he will not respawn again, and most games do respawn the enemy after a certain amount of time. So we're going to deal with this in the next episode, but in this episode we want to deal with our player. Before we get to this, there are a few adjustments that I want to show you in the code. First of all, if we go to our bear and we open the animal script, we talked about reducing the health of the bear, and we did this inside the update method, but this is not the most efficient way. I overlooked it because first we placed it over here and this was not the right place to put it. So instead of doing this in the update method, which is obviously not the most efficient way, we're going to place it inside the take damage method, but only after the damage is actually dealt. So you simply go over here, you cut this entire line, and you're going to place it over here after the damage is reduced. Now we can remove this entire update method, and we also had some code inside the start method related to the previous health, so we don't need this anymore. We remove the previous health and we remove the code that we had inside the start method. I simply removed it before this episode. The next thing I want to show you is, if we zoom in, we can see that this health bar is rather large, and this is not the most elegant way a health bar should look. So we can simply expand our bear UI, click on the health bar, and we can reduce the size to something like 5 and 30. Obviously, this may be too small for you, so let's maybe increase it a bit, maybe 50. And we can also reduce the size of the outline. So if we go into the fill, we have this outline, so we're going to change it to 1 and -1, and now this looks much better. Another thing that I noticed is if we go into our animator for the bear and we click on the attack state, we have an attack rate of 1. And in the previous episode, we saw that it actually matches the animation for the bear. But I played around with this and I saw that if the bear keeps hitting us for several seconds, for some reason, it goes out of sync. So you can either play around with the speed of the animation for the bear attack over here, maybe reduce it, or you can reduce the attack rate. So maybe this will be much better, maybe you should reduce the speed. So you can play around with these values and then you can build the game, and only inside the build itself you should get a real indication of if this thing is synced and not inside the Unity editor, because the Unity editor is not very consistent with frame rates. So now we want to deal with the player dying when the health goes under 0. So we saw that we get damaged when the bear is hitting us, but nothing happens. So obviously we don't have a player script, we have these movement scripts, but everything happens inside the player state singleton. Over here we have the health and other attributes. So I also added, let me show you inside, I added an audio source and 2 audio clips for the player pain sound and death sound. So all you need to do is add an audio source and 2 audio clips over here. And then on the actual player state singleton, you're going to create an audio source. Okay, so you simply add component, audio source, and you're going to drag it over here so we can have a reference. And you can also add these sounds. Now I'm going to provide you these files in the description, so you can simply unzip them and then create some kind of player folder and drag these files over here. And now we need to use them. So in order to use them, we can simply go to our player state, and over here, when we get damage, we can say if the player is hurt, use this player audio source, play one shot, and use the player pain sound. The same thing for when the player is dead. So player death sound, okay? And this way, all the sounds that are related to the player will be in one place. Obviously, we can create different kinds of sound managers, but this is a simple way, so everything will be organized in its own place. Now we want to start dealing with the death of the player, so instead of doing everything inside this part, we're simply going to create a method, public void player dead, and we can also take this and place it inside. And we actually want to prevent this from running each time, so we can create some kind of bool that will only allow this to happen once. So public bool is dead or is player dead. And then we can go back over here and we can say if the health is under 0 and player is not dead. So you can say false, or you can do it like this with the exclamation mark. And I'm sorry if you hear sounds in the background. These are my neighbors. They started drilling, but I hope it will not interfere too much. Now we are going to call this method over here when the player is dead, and of course when he is dead we are going to set this to be true. Now we also want to create a respawn method, because when the player is going to die, he's going to respawn. So public void respawn player, and we can already set this to be false because when we respawn the player, he is no longer dead. Okay, and this will basically allow this to happen all over again. Now, the way we're going to respawn the player is by simply creating some kind of checkpoint or area, and I don't know why the player is behind this house. Let's just move it a bit. We're simply going to create some kind of object that will be a respawn checkpoint, and when the player goes next to it and presses a key, he will basically register, and then if he dies, he will spawn in this location. Now if he goes to another checkpoint and registers over there, he will no longer be registered to the first one, but to the last one. And this can be a torch, maybe some kind of shrine, whatever you want, whatever fits your game. Okay, so first of all, let's create this script. We're going to create a script, and don't name it checkpoint because we already have a checkpoint class that we created for our questing system. Name it something like respawn location or something like that, okay? And inside this respawn location, we're going to have some logic. So we're going to have a bool to know if this location is registered. It will be false at the beginning. We're also going to have a reference to a game object that will be some kind of indicator. If this is a torch, you may want to light up a flame when it's registered. So I'm not going to say flame because this can be anything, but I'm just going to name it indicator. And we can say example flame. Then inside the start method, we are going to do something. So let's just keep this empty for now. And then we're going to have a few methods. Private void turn off indicator. We're going to have turn, or a better way is to name it register location and unregister location. And Then we also want to have a on trigger stay. So this will allow the player to press a button and register. So we can check if other compare tag is player and input get key down key code, let's say F. So if we press on the F key, and if this location is not registered, okay, so if it's not registered, then register location. Now back inside the player state, we need a few more variables over here. First of all, we need a reference to our active respawn location. So respawn location, active or registered respawn location. You can make it shorter. And we also want to create some kind of event, because when we register a new location, we want all the previous locations to unregister. And we don't want to create some kind of update method that will continuously look for this. This is not efficient. We're going to create a public event action on respawn registered. On respawn registered event. And then we can simply register or listen to it inside all the locations. And when this is triggered, all these locations will know to unregister. Okay, so now that we have this, we're going to fill up these methods. First of all, inside the start method, we're going to access the player state. And we're going to register to this event. So on respawn registered, and we're going to register, or it's confusing because we usually register to events and we also register to the spawn locations. So don't get confused. We're actually adding a listener to this event. So turn or unregister location. So each time this event is triggered, our respawn location will unregister, okay? And this logic will happen inside the unregister location method. So if player state instance current or registered respawn location is not this location, so if the respawn that we registered is not this one, we want to unregister. So is registered false, and indicator should be off as well. So if we have a flame, we want to turn it off. Now for the register location, we basically do the opposite. We take this, and instead of setting it over here, well, we can do it. We can simply, no, we need to create a method. So set registered location, okay? Because we want a reference to this registered location, and we're going to provide it with this. Now we don't have this method, but we're going to generate it. So hover and generate method, and this will generate this method inside the player state. Then we want to do all of this, but the other way around. We want to register it, and we want to turn the indicator on. So this may be a bit confusing, but you will see how everything connects together. Now we click on control and on this set registered location. And this is basically a method inside the player state that will take this respawn location and it will set it to be the registered respawn location, okay? And this is a reference inside the player state. And then we're also going to trigger the event. So on respawn registered, and we're going to invoke it. So now we need to create some kind of object that will be this respawn location. I'm going to provide a link in the description. Of course, you can use whatever you want. It will be this kind of shrine with, it's just a lantern. And if you see it this way, you can simply go to the materials and then select the materials and go to edit, universal pipeline, and upgrade selected materials. I already did this. So although this is pink, it will work. So now we simply take one of them, maybe something bigger. Let's say this one, we're going to increase it a bit. And even more, maybe 2. And we're going to place it, let's say over here, at the beginning of town. And let's unpack it and rename it to be respawn location. We're going to add this script, respawn location. And now we need a reference to the indicator. So for the indicator, I'm going to provide you a link for another free asset. It's going to be some kind of flame. Let's say fire with something like that. Yes, this will be nice. We're going to make it a bit smaller or even smaller. And we're going to set it inside. Maybe even smaller. For some reason, it doesn't get smaller. So I don't know why it's not getting smaller. Let's just unpack it. Let's make it a child of the respawn location. Let's 0 everything. And then we can place it in the middle. Maybe we can make the fire a bit smaller. So if we click on the fire, maybe the spread, we should make it a bit smaller. Okay, so we need to change this. So we can make it even smaller. So it's kind of weird because of the way the texture is working. Just make sure it's 0 on the X and 0 on the Z, and then just play around with the Y, okay? Now it's going to be inside, as you see, although it's a bit weird. Now again, you can use other ones. I'm using this one. So now we have the fire. Let's rename this to fire. And we're going to drag it to be referenced over here as the indicator. Of course, we also want to turn this off at the beginning. And now you can create, oh yeah, we also need to add a box collider. So box collider, that will be its trigger to detect the player. And we are going to set it to be like 10, 10, 10. So if the player goes inside, he can press on F. And now we are basically done, and we can create a prefab out of it. And we can create more of these. We can simply drag one over here or anywhere you want. So the player goes and registers to one of these respawn locations. Because he is inside, he presses on F and it will register the location. So it will set a reference inside the player state, and it will also register this specific location. Now this will invoke this event, so all the other respawn locations will get this triggered and they will unregister. Only the one that was registered will not be applied because we do this check over here. So it's very straightforward. But of course, you need to make sure that you have something registered, otherwise you will not respawn anywhere. So maybe at the beginning of your game, you have to make sure the player registers, or maybe manually register it for the player or something like that. Now, if we go to our player state, we basically want to trigger the respawn player. And inside the respawn player, we also need to add some logic. So basically, if the registered respawn location is not null, because we must have something registered, take the player, or actually let's create a vector3 position, and we're going to take the registered respawn location, transform position, we're going to save it, and eventually we're going to take the player body, transform position, and we're going to set it to be the position. Okay, now we also want to reset the health, because when we die, we want to have a full health again. So current health equals max health. And the reason that I did this is because we need to create some kind of offset for the spawning. Because if we spawn the player exactly on this location, it will get stuck, or maybe it will go underground. So we can say that position y plus equals, let's say, 5, and also position z plus equals 5. Now this may not work for you depending on your model, so just make sure that if you get spawned underground, or maybe you start falling, or maybe you're stuck somewhere, play around with these values, because these are the offsets, okay? So y means that it will go above the location, and this will be next to the location. And after we do all of this, we basically take the position and we set the player body to this position. So respawn the player. And at this point, when the player will die, this will happen, but I think that we can wait until he's actually respawned and only then make him undead, okay? So you can place this at the end when he fully respawns, and the player dead will trigger the player respawn, okay? So he's dead, we're going to hear this, and then we're going to respawn the player. Now, at this point, you can have different approaches. Maybe you don't want the player to immediately respawn. Maybe you want to create some kind of death screen and say you are dead, and then create some kind of button that when the player clicks on the button, he will respawn. Maybe he will have a button to load a new game or something like that. So for this, you simply create some kind of death screen and you set it to be active. And inside of this death screen, that will basically just be some kind of game object UI, you are going to create a button, and then the button will trigger this respawn player method. Okay, so we are not going to do it over here. But because I don't want to spend time on this and I just want to spawn the player, and you should know how to do this if you've been following this entire series, it's not something difficult. You just create some kind of UI with a button and you set it to be active, and then when the player respawns, you set it to be disabled again. But when the player clicks on a button, you can create some kind of on-click event and call this method, and it will respawn the player. We are not going to do this death screen, so we're simply going to respawn the player when he dies, okay? And this should basically work. Maybe I'm forgetting something, but if we go over here, the player is dead. He goes under 0, and also he is not dead, then he's going to die. Let's also create some kind of check over here, because we don't want to keep playing this pain sound. So if it's above 0, okay, because we don't want to keep playing this sound if the player is dead. So only if it's above 0, then play this. So at this point, we can basically run the game and it should work. But during my testing, I noticed that there is some kind of problem that happens, and it doesn't happen all the time, but it can happen from time to time, and I just want to prevent it altogether. So if we scroll down inside the player state, first of all, make sure that you play around with these settings as I told you, because maybe in your case the model is bigger. So just make sure that the area around the respawn location is clear and you can actually respawn or just teleport your player to this position. Now, another thing we need to do, and this is something that may cause us problems, is because we have our player movement script and our mouse movement script, this can interfere with the player moving to a different position, because inside the player movement script, we always keep changing the position of the player, and this can cause us problems. So to solve this, we're going to do a few things. First of all, instead of just calling this respawn player method over here, we're going to make it into a coroutine. So we're going to keep it like this, but we're going to have a method respawn player, public void respawn player, and this will call a coroutine. So start coroutine, and we're going to name it respawn coroutine. And then we're going to rename this thing into respawn coroutine, and we're going to change it into an I enumerator. And now this is a coroutine. Of course, we need to add these braces over here, but of course it needs some kind of yield return. So over here, we're going to disable the player movement and the mouse movement scripts when this is happening. Otherwise, we can get different weird things. So we basically do player body, get component, player movement, script, enabled false, and we do the same thing for the mouse movement. And then when all of this is done, we're basically going to enable it. But we're going to get some kind of error even if we do this, and to prevent it, we simply add this small delay. So we anyway need to add a delay because it's a coroutine, so we do the delay over here after this logic is done, but before we actually re-enable these scripts. So we do yield return, wait 4 seconds, and we can do something very short like 0.2, and new wait 4 seconds, and this will cause a small delay, and then everything will work and it will enable these scripts. So this is a way you can prevent these small bugs that you may encounter from time to time. Now, another thing that we may want to address is over here, when the player is getting hurt, he's going to make a sound each time the bear is attacking. But this can be a bit annoying because the bear is basically attacking us every second. So we're going to hear the sound every second and it can be annoying. So to prevent, we're going to create some kind of delay, and then you can play around with this pain sound. So if you don't want this to happen too much, you can basically make a bigger delay and then you're not going to hear it. So private float, we're going to have some kind of hurt sound delay. We're going to set it to 1 or maybe 2 seconds. And then private float, next hurt time. This will be some kind of counter. And then over here, when we actually get hurt, where is it? Over here, we're going to check if the current health is bigger than 0 and time.time is bigger or equals next hurt time. Then we basically play this sound, and we're going to set the next hurt time to be time.time plus hurt sound delay. We basically add some kind of delay, so it will not play each time we're getting hurt, but there will be a delay between each time we hear the sound, and this will make it sound a bit better. Now, another thing I also want to mention is that at this point, if we go over here, we can see that our bear doesn't have any attack sound. So he has the hit and scream, so when we hit the bear and when we kill the bear. But the actual bear attack sound, we don't have it. So you can find any sound that you like and you can add it to the bear. I'm just going to use the same sound for the hit because it sounds just like a bear roar, and this will sound better when the bear is attacking us. So I'm going to use this bear hit over here as well. We also know that we need to register each time we run the game, right? We need to register and only then we can respawn. But if you want to test this out, or maybe you have some kind of checkpoint at the beginning of the game, you can basically just go to your player state system and drag this checkpoint over here, so it will already be registered when you start the game. And then you don't really need to do this manually. You don't need to go over here and register each time. You can simply make it registered when you start the game. Now we are not going to do this because then we also need to enable the fire, but this is just an option that you can keep in mind, especially if you have a checkpoint at the beginning of the game and you want the player to still respawn if he dies. Okay, so now we're going to start the game and let's hope everything is working. So now we need to register. It can be this one or this one, doesn't matter. Press F, and now we are registered, and now let's die. You can also hear the pain, and you can hear the attack. And we were respawned, and we also heard the dying sound. And you also saw that because we have a small offset on the y-axis, we basically start over here and then we fall down. So this is a nice touch. Again, this is very straightforward, so when we die we just respawn over here, but of course you can create some kind of death screen with some kind of blood, and you can say you are dead. You can have buttons for the respawn. So on this button, all you need to do is create a UI, right? A simple UI over here inside the player canvas, create a UI with some buttons, with some text, and then on your button, let's say you have a button. Let's find a button. On each button, you will find this on-click listener. So you simply add an event, you drag your player state system, and then you go and you trigger this respawn player method. So it will be the exact same thing. We don't need this because this is not the correct UI, but you basically trigger this thing, this method from the UI instead of doing this, right? So instead of calling it over here, you will simply have the death screen, set active. You're going to activate the death screen UI. And on this UI, you're going to have some buttons. And when you press the button, it's going to call this method. So this is an option that you can consider for your game. Obviously, you can have death animations. You can make the player fall on the ground. You can add animations to the camera, maybe tilt it, maybe rotate it. You can do a lot of things, but this is the base for all of this. And now you know how to do it. And then it's really up to you. So now our player can die, our player can respawn, we have these checkpoints. Also, these checkpoints are useful for other games, for other things, and not only for our situation over here, and it's kind of nice. So in the next episode, we're going to deal with the animal respawn. So each time we kill an enemy, or basically each enemy will be spawned using some kind of spawner. It will be a transparent object that we are going to place, and then the enemy is going to spawn at the beginning of the game. but when we kill this enemy, there will be some kind of delay, and after this time is over, the enemy will respawn in the same location, and we are going to be able to kill him again and get more loot. Or you can just disable this respawner so you can only kill it once. It's really up to you, but this is something we're going to learn in the next episode. So thank you for watching. Please subscribe. You can also leave a like. You can also become a member of the channel. And I'll see you next time.